Welcome to Locust Street's digital photography program. I'm Darron. Today we're going to be getting into some information about shutter speed. So in photography, there's a thing called the exposure triangle, a combination of your three core essentials for all photography: ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. Knowing how to control these three things is the core to mastering photography. Today we're specifically talking about shutter speeds, and we'll get into those other two in other videos. And we're going to keep this simple by breaking it down to three things: what it is, what it does, and how to control it. So let's get into that. Shutter speed. What is it? Essentially, the shutter in your camera is a gate that opens and closes at a predetermined amount of time. You'll often see these increments represented by the 1 over another number. That bottom number represents the actual amount of time as opposed to a second that you're using to control your shutter. In terms of setting a shutter speed, you'll often hear it referred to as like 1/160th of a second, 1/30th of a second, 1/1000th of a second. So what does it do? Shutter speed, like aperture, is responsible for how light gets into the camera. But the way that shutter speed takes care of it is responsible for the appearance of motion. If you have a longer shutter speed, allowing more light into the camera for a longer time gives you more instances of your subject on your frame, which we visually interpret as motion blur, as opposed to something very fast like 100th of a second or 1000th of a second will freeze action in its tracks. In a situation when you're dealing with low light, if you have a tripod or something to keep your camera stable, having a longer shutter speed also allows you to allow more light to increase your exposure time long enough to actually capture your image even if it's dark outside. This is the base of a lot of nighttime photography. Beyond just being able to take a technically correct exposure, this actually gives us a lot of creative freedom. For example, being able to capture light trails is possible because once you have something to keep your camera steady, the appearance of motion against a static background is emphasized more with a longer exposure. When you have a city not moving and cars flowing through that city, that's where images like these are possible. All the instances of light being recorded are moving in the direction of the cars, which we can see because the shutter speed is long enough to capture all of it as it streaks through the static city. Okay, now, so how do you control it? It's pretty straightforward. Much like aperture, there's typically a control dial dedicated to your shutter speed, or it may be an alternate that controls both shutter speed and aperture. In most cameras, you'll recognize the shutter speed by looking at the number that has 1 over another number, or sometimes it just appears as a whole number, in contrast to your aperture, which is typically displayed with an F and measured in decimals. By spinning the dial on the front or back of your camera, it'll shift your shutter speed. Obviously, you'll have to keep this in a proper ratio to your aperture based off of whatever you're shooting, but it's as simple as that. So now that you know a little bit more about shutter speed, you're one step closer to mastering photography. So go out there, take some photos.
I like this.